I resigned. Using only GIFs, the internet loved it. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But in my case, it was served with a side of animated GIFs and went viral faster than you could say, I quit. 12 million views, 600,000 shares, and one very public corporate meltdown later. I finally understood what it meant to win. My name is Olivia Wright, and 6 months ago, I was just another overworked, underappreciated senior marketing analyst at Pinnacle Dynamics, a mid-sized tech consultancy firm that prided itself on disrupting the industry while refusing to disrupt its toxic workplace culture. Little did they know I was about to disrupt everything. The morning it all began started like any other. I arrived at the office at precisely 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before I needed to be there, just as I had for the past 4 years. The security guard, Hector, nodded as I swiped my badge. "Early as always, Ms. Wright," he said with a tired smile. "You know it, Hector. Someone's got to keep this place running." The joke had grown stale about 3 years ago, but we still exchanged it like a comfortable ritual. I took the elevator to the 14th floor, the fluorescent lights already buzzing with that particular frequency that seemed designed to induce migraines. The office was empty except for the cleaning staff and, of course, Linda from accounting, who made it her mission to arrive before everyone else just so she could mention it in every conversation. "Morning, Olivia," Linda said, not looking up from her computer. "You're here early." "Morning, Linda. Not as early as you, though." "Never am," she replied with a self-satisfied smirk. I settled at my desk, opened my laptop, and began my morning routine of checking emails that had accumulated overnight. My inbox was already overflowing with messages marked urgent from our creative director, Vanessa Powell. Vanessa had been my direct supervisor for 2 years, and in that time, she'd managed to take credit for every successful campaign I'd developed while ensuring any failures landed squarely on my shoulders. She was a master of corporate politics, with a smile for the executives and claws for anyone below her. The first email read, "Need the Hartwell presentation by 9 a.m. Client meeting moved up. Make it happen." The Hartwell presentation wasn't due until next week. I had been working on it between 3 other priority projects, all of which Vanessa had also labeled do or die. I opened the draft presentation and grimaced. It was nowhere near ready for client eyes. My phone pinged with a text from my best friend and coworker, Riley Thompson. "Heard about Hartwell. V strikes again. Need backup?" I texted back, "I've got it. Save yourself." Riley and I had started at Pinnacle on the same day, bonding over our mutual love of obscure indie films and our increasing disillusionment with corporate America. Unlike me, Riley had managed to carve out a niche in the research department where they were somewhat protected from Vanessa's reign of terror. I worked frantically for the next hour, pulling together slides, massaging data to tell the story Vanessa wanted, not necessarily the story the data was actually telling, and trying to make it all look cohesive. At 8:57 a.m., I sent the presentation to Vanessa with a brief message. "Hartwell presentation attached. Let me know if you need any changes." At 9:15 a.m., my desk phone rang. It was Vanessa. "Olivia, what is this garbage?" she hissed into the phone. "The Hartwell presentation, as requested," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "This is nowhere near the quality I expect. The third quarter projections are missing. The competitive analysis is superficial at best. And where are the market penetration scenarios I asked for?" "You never mentioned market penetration scenarios, Vanessa. And the third quarter projections weren't available from finance yet. Excuses won't impress the client. Olivia, I need this fixed in the next 15 minutes. The meeting's at 9:45. The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a moment, trying to control my breathing. This was classic Vanessa, moving goalposts, inventing requirements after the fact, setting impossible deadlines. And yet, somehow, I always managed to deliver. I messaged Samantha in finance directly, bypassing the usual request channels. "Sam, I need Q3 projections for Hartwell ASAP. Vanessa's meeting them at 9:45. "Shit. Liv, those aren't ready. We're still waiting on numbers from their West Coast division. Can you give me anything, Even preliminary? I can send what we have, but it comes with a giant asterisk. I'll take it, and I'll protect you when it all goes south. 10 minutes later, I had incorporated Sam's preliminary projections, thrown together a competitive analysis based on publicly available data, and created 3 market penetration scenarios that were, at best, educated guesses. I sent the revised presentation to Vanessa at 9:32 a.m. At 9:33 a.m., she replied, "Better. I've already left for the meeting. Forwarding to the team now." No thank you. No acknowledgement of the impossible task she'd set, just better and on to the next crisis she would manufacture. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion washing over me despite it not even being 10 a.m. yet. This had been my life for 2 years. Constant emergencies, moving targets, late nights, and early mornings. And for what? My last performance review had noted that I met expectations, but needed to show more initiative. This after implementing a social media strategy that had increased engagement by 347% and landing us 3 new major clients. At 12:45 p.m., Vanessa returned from the client meeting. She swept past my desk without a glance, heading straight for Tom Bradford's office. Tom was our department head, a 50-something former sales exec who had been promoted to marketing despite having no actual marketing experience. His main qualifications appeared to be his golf handicap and his Harvard Business School network. Through the glass walls of Tom's office, I could see Vanessa gesturing animatedly, pointing at what looked like the Hartwell presentation on Tom's screen. Tom nodded, looking impressed. I knew exactly what was happening. Vanessa was taking credit for my work, again. At 1:30 p.m., I received a calendar invite for a 4:30 p.m. meeting in the main conference room. The subject line read, Hartwell Campaign Kickoff. The attendees included the entire marketing team, several executives, and the Hartwell clients themselves. I was listed as optional. I stared at my computer screen, a strange calm settling over me. 4 years of dedication. Countless nights working until midnight. Weekends sacrificed. Vacations postponed or canceled entirely. All for a company that couldn't even acknowledge my contributions enough to list me as a required attendee for a meeting about a presentation I had created. Riley appeared at my desk, coffee in hand. "You look like you could use this extra shot." "Thanks," I said, taking the cup gratefully. "Did you see the Hartwell meeting invite?" Riley grimaced. "Yeah, listed as optional? That's cold, even for Vanessa." "You know what's funny? I'm not even surprised anymore. It's just expected." "That's how they get you," Riley said, perching on the edge of my desk. "They normalize the absurd until you think it's normal to be treated like crap." I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth spread through me. You know what I realized this morning? I haven't used a single vacation day this year. Not one. Seriously, it's June. I know. I keep thinking I'll take time off after this big project or that important deadline, but there's always another one. It never ends. Riley gave me a concerned look. "That's not sustainable. Live." "None of this is," I replied, gesturing vaguely at the office around us. "But what's the alternative?" Before Riley could answer, my computer pinged with an email notification. It was from Bradley Winston, the CEO, sent to the entire company. "Congratulations to Vanessa Powell on securing the expanded Hartwell account. Her innovative marketing strategy and forward-thinking approach have once again proven why Pinnacle Dynamics leads the industry. Well done, Vanessa." I felt something inside me shift, like a tectonic plate finally giving way after years of pressure. I looked at Riley, who was reading the email on their phone. "That's it," I said quietly. "I'm done." "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done. Finished. I can't do this anymore." Riley's eyes widened. "Liv, don't make any rash decisions." "It's not rash. It's 4 years in the making." I stood up, suddenly energized. "I need some air. Cover for me." Riley nodded, concern written across their face. "Always. But promise me you won't do anything dramatic without talking to me first." "Promise," I said, already knowing I was lying. I took the elevator down to the lobby and walked 2 blocks to a small park where I often ate lunch when I actually took a lunch break. Finding an empty bench. I sat down and pulled out my phone. I had 37 unread emails, 12 Slack notifications, and 3 missed calls, all from the past hour. The weight of constant connectivity felt suffocating. As I scrolled mindlessly through my phone, trying to quiet my racing thoughts, I found myself in my photo gallery, looking at the collection of reaction GIFs I'd saved over the years. There was one of a cat slowly pushing a cup off a table while maintaining direct eye contact. My go-to response whenever Riley texted about another of Vanessa's ridiculous demands. And that's when the idea hit me. What if I resigned? Using nothing but GIFs. It was absurd, unprofessional, potentially career-ending in terms of references, and yet I couldn't shake the thought. There was something deliciously satisfying about the idea of responding to years of corporate doublespeak and empty platitudes with silent, expressive images that conveyed exactly how I felt. I opened my GIF collection and started scrolling more deliberately. A plan began to form, outrageous and perfect in its simplicity, but I'd need help. I texted Riley. Need to talk, privately, not at the office, drinks after work? The response came quickly. Ominous, Sullivan's at 6. Perfect. I returned to the office with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control, not just reacting to the next crisis. I sat through the Hartwell kickoff meeting, watching as Vanessa presented my work as her own, nodding and smiling at all the right moments. Tom and the executives heaped praise on her innovative approach. The clients seemed impressed, and through it all, I maintained a pleasant, professional demeanor, all the while thinking, enjoy this moment. It's the last time you'll get to take credit for my work. At 5:45 p.m., I packed up my desk, careful not to take anything that would signal my intentions. Just my purse and the small plant Riley had given me on my last work anniversary. Sullivan's was a dive bar far enough from the office that we rarely ran into coworkers there. Riley was already at a booth in the back when I arrived, 2 beers waiting on the table. Okay, they said as I slid into the seat across from them. What's going on? You had that look today. What look? The I'm about to burn everything to the ground look. I've seen it before. Right before you decimated that client who tried to mansplain marketing to you. I smiled at the memory. It had been one of my finer moments, professionally speaking. I'm quitting, I said simply. Riley nodded. I figured as much after that email. Can't say I blame you. What's the plan? 2 weeks notice, exit interview where you finally tell Tom what you really think of his synergy obsession? I'm going to resign using nothing but GIFs. Riley choked on their beer. I'm sorry. You're going to what now? Send my resignation letter, conduct my exit interview, and respond to any and all follow-up communication using nothing but GIFs. I pulled out my phone and showed them the collection I'd been curating all afternoon. Liv, that's... Riley paused, searching for the right word. That's either the most brilliant or most insane thing I've ever heard. Why not both? I grinned. But I need your help. I'm listening. I need you to document everything, reactions, responses, meltdowns, all of it, and I need you to help me pick the perfect GIFs for maximum impact. Riley considered this for a moment, then clinked their beer against mine. I'm in, on one condition. Name it. You let me post it all to Reddit when it's over. And that's how Operation GIF Resignation was born. We spent the next 3 hours at Sullivan's, drinking beer and meticulously planning my exit strategy. We created categories for different types of corporate responses I might receive and selected the perfect GIFs for each scenario. We developed a timeline and contingency plans. By the time we left the bar, I had a folder of over 100 carefully chosen GIFs, organized by category and emotional impact. I felt lighter than I had in years, giddy with the prospect of finally taking back some control. The next morning, I arrived at the office at my usual time. Hector greeted me with our usual exchange, unaware that it would be our last. I settled at my desk, opened my laptop, and took a deep breath. First, I composed an email to HR, Tom, and Vanessa. The subject line read, "My resignation." The body of the email contained nothing but a GIF of Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation throwing his computer in a dumpster, followed by a second GIF of a woman dramatically dropping a microphone and walking away. I clicked send before I could second-guess myself. Then I waited. It took exactly 7 minutes for Vanessa to appear at my desk, her face flushed with anger. "What is this?" she demanded, holding up her phone with my email displayed. I smiled and showed her my phone screen, where I'd queued up a GIF of Wendy Testaberger from South Park slowly mouthing, "Bye-bye." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Is this some kind of joke? Because it's not funny." "Olivia, we have the Hartwell implementation meeting at 11, and I need the budget projections." I responded with a GIF of a cat knocking items off a shelf one by one while maintaining eye contact. "This is completely unprofessional," Vanessa hissed, lowering her voice as she became aware of the attention we were attracting. "If you have issues, there are proper channels to address them." My next GIF showed a dumpster fire with the caption, "This is fine." By now, several of my colleagues had stopped pretending to work and were openly watching the exchange. Riley, true to their word, was discreetly recording the interaction on their phone. Vanessa's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Tom's office, now!" she snapped before turning on her heel. I gathered my phone and followed her, catching Riley's encouraging thumbs up as I passed. Tom was already in his office, looking confused and mildly annoyed. "Olivia, what's going on? Is this email for real?" I nodded and showed him a GIF of Oprah emphatically saying, "I'm done." "I don't understand," Tom said, looking genuinely perplexed. "Is there something wrong? Are you unhappy with your position? Your last review was positive." My response, a GIF of Jennifer Lawrence sarcastically saying, "Yeah, tell me about it." "If this is about compensation, we can discuss." I cut him off with a GIF of Dr. Evil from Austin Powers making air quotes around billions and billions of dollars. Tom exchanged a look with Vanessa, who had composed herself somewhat. "Olivia, I think you need to take some time to consider what you're doing. This method of communication is unorthodox." My next GIF showed Sherlock Holmes saying, "No shit, Sherlock." "That's enough," Vanessa snapped. "This is blatant insubordination. If you want to resign, fine, but there are protocols. We need a formal letter, transition documents, knowledge transfer sessions." I interrupted with a GIF of a woman pointing to a paper calendar and then making a sweeping, "All of this is cancelled" gesture. "You can't just," Vanessa began. My next GIF, Leonardo DiCaprio from The Wolf of Wall Street declaring, "I'm not leaving." Tom looked confused. "But you are leaving." I quickly followed with a GIF of The Rock saying, "Just watch me," and then walking away. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa said, turning to Tom. "We should call security." I responded with a GIF of a woman laughing hysterically while saying, "Good luck with that." Tom sighed deeply. "Olivia, please, can we have a real conversation about this? Whatever the issue is, I'm sure we can work it out." I showed him a GIF of Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones saying, "Dracarys," right before her dragon burns everything to the ground. At that moment, Maria from HR knocked on the door. "I got a strange email from Olivia," she said, then noticed me sitting there. "Oh, you're already addressing it. Good." "She's not talking," Vanessa said through gritted teeth. "She's only communicating with those things." Maria raised an eyebrow. "GIFs, is that right, Olivia?" I nodded and showed her a GIF of Kermit the Frog, enthusiastically nodding. Maria, to her credit, seemed to find the situation more interesting than problematic. "I see. And this is your formal resignation?" Another nod, accompanied by a GIF of Captain America saluting. "Well, this is certainly a first," Maria said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I'll need to document this somehow. When do you intend this resignation to be effective?" I held up my phone showing a GIF of a clock with the hands spinning rapidly, followed by one that simply said, "Today." "Immediate resignation?" Maria clarified. I confirmed with a thumbs up GIF. "She can't just walk out today," Vanessa protested. What about the Hartwell campaign? What about knowledge transfer? My response was a gif of a woman shrugging with the caption, "Not my problem anymore." "This is completely unacceptable," Vanessa fumed. "Tom, you can't allow this." Tom looked uncomfortable. "Legally, we can't force her to stay, Vanessa." "Then she shouldn't expect a reference or her final paycheck." At this, I calmly showed a gif of a woman holding up printed documents, followed by one of a lawyer adjusting his tie with the caption, "Try me." Maria intervened. "Actually, withholding a final paycheck would be illegal, Vanessa. And as for references, that's not really a hill worth dying on." I showed Maria a gif of someone giving an approving nod. "Fine," Vanessa snapped. "Let her leave. We'll be better off without this kind of childish behavior anyway. But don't think this won't have consequences for your career, Olivia." My final gift to Vanessa was of Willy Wonka saying, "You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir." And with that, I stood up, nodded to Maria, ignored Vanessa and Tom completely, and walked out of the office. As I passed my desk, I grabbed my plant, gave Riley a quick wink, and headed for the elevator. Behind me, I could hear the office erupting into whispers and exclamations. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was buzzing with texts from colleagues who had already heard what happened. The news was spreading faster than I had anticipated. I texted Riley, "Mission accomplished. Phase 1 complete." They replied immediately, "You're a legend. Entire office talking. V looks like she's going to explode. What's phase 2? Check your email in 10. Once I was safely in a coffee shop 2 blocks away, I sent an email to the entire marketing department. The subject line read, "The gifts that keep on giving." In it, I included gifts that represented my feelings about working at Pinnacle, a dumpster fire for the workload, a hamster running frantically on a wheel for the constant crisis mode, and a gif of money being blown away in the wind for the compensation structure. I ended with a gif of a woman raising a toast with the caption, "To your freedom," and another of a door closing with "Onwards and upwards" superimposed. Within minutes, my phone was flooded with responses from colleagues. Some sent gifs back in solidarity. Others sent messages of support mixed with disbelief at my audacity. A few sent warnings that Vanessa was on the warpath, trying to figure out how to contain the situation. By mid-afternoon, Riley reported that Tom had called an emergency department meeting to discuss appropriate workplace communication and team morale. Apparently, several team members had used the opportunity to raise concerns about Vanessa's management style and the unsustainable work expectations, turning what was supposed to be damage control into something closer to a revolt. That evening, Riley came over to my apartment with a bottle of champagne and their laptop. "You won't believe what happened after you left," they said, popping the cork. "It was glorious chaos. Half the department is talking about quitting. Tom looked like he was having an existential crisis. And Vanessa kept insisting that you were just emotionally unstable, and that's why you couldn't use words." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "So, phase 2, already in progress," Riley said, opening their laptop. "I edited the videos, created a throwaway account, and it's ready to post. Just need your final approval." The video Riley had created was a masterpiece of corporate drama. They'd captured key moments of my GIF-based exit, added captions explaining the context, and ended with a compilation of reaction shots from around the office. They'd been careful to blur faces and remove any identifying information about the company or individuals, focusing instead on the concept of resigning purely through GIFs. "Post it," I said without hesitation. Riley hit enter, and just like that, our story was live on Reddit, Twitter, and TikTok. We stayed up late, watching as the posts gained traction. By midnight, the Reddit post had over 5,000 upvotes and hundreds of comments, most of them supportive and many sharing their own stories of toxic workplaces and dramatic exits. The next morning, I woke to Riley calling me. "Liv, check your phone. It's happening." I opened social media to find that our post had exploded overnight. The Reddit thread had hit the front page with over 50,000 upvotes. The TikTok video had been viewed more than 2 million times. GIF resignation was trending on Twitter. News outlets had picked up the story with headlines like, "Woman quits toxic job using only GIFs, becomes internet's newest hero," and "The Great GIF-signation. When words aren't enough to quit your job." My phone rang again. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Is this Olivia Wright, the GIF resignation woman?" "Who's asking?" "This is Priya Shah from BuzzFeed. We'd love to do an interview about your viral resignation. We think our readers would really connect with your story." This was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I received interview requests from various media outlets, podcasts focused on workplace culture, and even a few job offers from companies who appreciated my creative problem-solving and authentic communication style. A week after my resignation, Riley texted me a screenshot of an internal email at Pinnacle. The subject line read, "Leadership changes in marketing department." The body announced that Vanessa Powell was pursuing other opportunities and that the company would be conducting a thorough review of departmental management practices. 2 weeks later, a former colleague leaked that Tom had been called into a series of meetings with the executive team and HR to explain how workplace culture had deteriorated to the point where an employee would choose such a public and unconventional way to resign. The fallout had led to an external audit of the company's management practices and a comprehensive review of workloads and compensation structures. 3 weeks after my GIF resignation, I accepted a position as marketing director at Novosphere, a competitor that had been trying to recruit me for months. My new contract included explicit protections for work-life balance, creative control over my projects, and a salary that was 40% higher than what I'd been making at Pinnacle. On my first day, my new team presented me with a welcome basket that included, among other things, a coffee mug emblazoned with the GIF of Ron Swanson throwing his computer in a dumpster, the very first GIF of my resignation. "We're really glad you're here," said my new boss, Cameron Rivera, with a genuine smile. "And I promise, if you ever want to quit, you can just use words." Though the GIF approach was pretty spectacular. 6 months later, my GIF resignation remains one of the most upvoted posts of all time in the r/anti-work subreddit. The video has over 12 million views across platforms. I've been invited to speak at conferences about toxic workplace culture and modern approaches to workforce retention. Riley, who still works at Pinnacle, though now under new, much improved management, regularly updates me on how my departure continues to influence positive changes in the company. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried harder to address the issues at Pinnacle before resorting to such a dramatic exit. Could I have scheduled meetings with HR, filed formal complaints, requested a department transfer? Perhaps. But after years of being talked over, having my work stolen, and watching my concerns be dismissed as not being a team player, there was something powerfully validating about communicating in a way that couldn't be ignored, reinterpreted, or used against me. In the end, my GIF resignation wasn't just about quitting a toxic job. It was about reclaiming my voice in a workplace that had systematically silenced it. It was about turning powerlessness into power, frustration into viral fame, and a dead-end job into an opportunity for positive change. Not just for me, but for all the colleagues I left behind. As for Vanessa, last I heard, she was consulting. Her LinkedIn profile now lists her as a workplace communications specialist, which might be the most ironic career pivot I've ever witnessed. Yesterday, I received a message request on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. When I opened it, there was no text, just a GIF of a white flag waving in surrender, followed by another of a person giving a reluctant thumbs up. The username, vpowell or official. I responded the only way that felt right, with a GIF of a woman raising a glass in a toast, followed by one simple word. Accepted. Some battles end with words, others with silence. Mine ended with GIFs. And in a world where corporate communication is so often a tool for obfuscation and control, sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is one without any words at all. Just don't try this at home unless you're prepared to go viral. Trust me on that one. But my story didn't end with that viral moment. What happened next was even more unexpected. 2 months after my GIF resignation, I received an email from a literary agent. She'd seen my story and was convinced it would make a compelling book. Part memoir, part workplace survival guide. At first, I laughed it off. Who would want to read an entire book about my petty workplace revenge? But the agent was persistent, and eventually, I agreed to meet with her. Look, she said over coffee. What you did resonated with millions of people for a reason. It wasn't just the novelty of quitting with GIFs, it was what those GIFs represented. The frustration of being undervalued, the satisfaction of reclaiming your power, the catharsis of a dramatic exit. People want to know how to survive toxic workplaces, and they want to know it's okay to leave them. I signed with her the following week, and 6 months later. Speaking Without Words, How I Quit My Job with GIFs and Found My Voice was picked up by a major publisher. The advance wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to validate the project. I spent the next year writing between my new job responsibilities, often working late into the night to capture the details of my pinnacle experience while they were still fresh in my memory. The writing process was more therapeutic than I'd anticipated. As I documented the slow erosion of my confidence under Vanessa's management, I recognized patterns that had begun long before she became my boss. The way I'd learned to minimize my achievements, to apologize for asking questions, to work twice as hard for half the recognition. These weren't just Vanessa problems or pinnacle problems. They were systemic issues that had followed me through my entire career. Riley became my unofficial editor, fact-checking my recollections and offering encouragement when I doubted the project's value. The world needs this book, they insisted, not just because it's a great story, but because it might give someone else the courage to walk away from their own Vanessa. The book was published 18 months after my resignation, with a cover featuring the now iconic image of Ron Swanson throwing his computer in the dumpster. The initial print run was modest, 5,000 copies, but pre-orders exceeded expectations, largely driven by the online community that had followed my story from the beginning. The publisher arranged a small book tour, 5 cities, mostly independent bookstores. I took 2 weeks of vacation from Novosphere, nervous about how my new colleagues would react to me dredging up workplace drama, even if it was from a different company. To my surprise, Cameron encouraged it. "This is part of who you are," she said. And frankly, it's a perspective more leaders need to hear. The first reading was in a cramped bookstore in Brooklyn, with folding chairs set up between crowded shelves. I expected maybe 20 people, friends of friends, a few curious locals who'd seen the posters. Instead, I walked into a standing room-only crowd of over 100. As I read excerpts from the book, I watched faces in the audience nodding in recognition, eyes widening at particularly egregious Vanessa moments, and hands covering mouths during the description of my GIF-based exit. The Q&A session afterward lasted twice as long as scheduled, with people sharing their own workplace horror stories and asking for advice on how to navigate similar situations. A woman in her early 20s approached me during the signing afterward, clutching her copy of the book so tightly her knuckles were white. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been dealing with my own Vanessa for 2 years, and reading about your experience made me feel less alone, less crazy." "You're definitely not crazy," I assured her. "I put in my 2 weeks' notice yesterday," she continued, a small smile breaking through. "I didn't use GIFs, but I did quote your Reddit post in my resignation letter." Encounters like that one became common as the tour continued. In Chicago, a group of friends who'd all quit the same toxic startup came together. In Austin, a former executive apologized for being someone's Vanessa and shared how the viral story had made him reevaluate his management style. In Seattle, a woman brought her daughter, explaining that she wanted her to grow up knowing it was okay to stand up for herself in the workplace. The book never hit the New York Times bestseller list, but it developed a devoted following. Book clubs picked it up, universities added it to business ethics courses, and corporate training programs used it as a case study in what not to do as a manager. A year after publication, sales had surpassed 100,000 copies, respectable for a first-time author writing about workplace politics. What surprised me most, though, was the impact on Pinnacle dynamics. The company had been mentioned by name in the book, with approval from legal, after much negotiation. And rather than suing or issuing denials, they leaned into the story. 6 months after publication, Bradley Winston, the CEO who had congratulated Vanessa in that fateful email, reached out to me directly. "I'd like to meet." His message read, "No lawyers, no PR team, just a conversation." Against Riley's advice, "It's a trap," I agreed to coffee at a neutral location. Winston looked older than his company headshot, the lines around his eyes deeper, his posture less commanding than I remembered. "I've read your book," he said after we'd exchanged awkward pleasantries. "Twice, actually." "And?" I prompted when he didn't continue. And it was uncomfortable. Illuminating, but uncomfortable. He twisted his coffee cup in his hands. "I've been running companies for 20 years, and I've always prided myself on creating positive work environments. Reading about your experience at Pinnacle, under my leadership, it was a wake-up call." I waited, suspicious of where this was heading. "The external audit we conducted after your departure revealed that your situation wasn't unique. We had a systemic problem with middle management, particularly in high-pressure departments like marketing." He paused. "We've spent the last year implementing changes, new leadership training, clearer promotion criteria, anonymous feedback channels, workload balancing measures." "That's good to hear," I said cautiously. "We're also launching a new initiative next quarter," he continued. "A series of workshops on healthy workplace communication and conflict resolution. We'd like you to consult on the program." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You want me, the person who quit your company using GIFs and then wrote a book about how toxic it was, to help design your communication workshops?" Winston smiled for the first time. "Exactly. Who better? You've experienced the worst of our culture and found a creative way to expose it. Our employees would respect your perspective more than any corporate consultant we could hire." I laughed despite myself. "That's either brilliant or completely insane." "Why not both?" he replied, echoing my own words to Riley from months before. I agreed to think about it, skeptical but intrigued by the possibility of creating real change from the inside. After consulting with Riley, Cameron, and my agent, who immediately saw a potential sequel, I negotiated a consulting arrangement with Pinnacle. I would help design their communication workshops in exchange for a generous fee and complete creative control over the content. My first day back at Pinnacle, 3 years after I'd started there as an eager new marketing analyst, was surreal. The lobby had been remodeled, but Hector was still at the security desk, doing a comical double-take when he saw me. "Ms. Wright, you're back?" "Just consulting, Hector. Don't worry, no gifts today." He chuckled. "Shame. That video your friend posted was the highlight of my year here." The 14th floor looked largely the same, though the marketing department had been rearranged. Riley met me by the elevator, vibrating with excitement. "I can't believe you're actually doing this," they said, leading me toward a conference room. "Half the department thinks you're a hero for coming back to help fix things, and the other half thinks you're crazy for setting foot in this building again." "What do you think?" I asked. Riley grinned. "Both, obviously. But mostly I think it's the perfect final chapter for your revenge story." The workshops were scheduled as a series of 4 sessions over 2 months. For the first one, I prepared a presentation on communication breakdowns, recognizing the warning signs. As employees filed into the conference room, I recognized many faces, some friendly, some wary, some openly curious. Tom Bradford was among them, looking uncomfortable but determined. He approached me before I began. "I just wanted to say," he started, then paused, searching for words. "Your book made me realize how badly I failed as a manager, not just with you, but with everyone. I'm trying to do better." I nodded, surprised by his sincerity. That's all any of us can do. The workshop was more successful than I'd anticipated. People engaged honestly, sharing examples of communication failures they'd experienced or perpetuated. We analyzed the GIFs I'd used in my resignation. discussing what each one conveyed and why they'd been so effective as communication tools. By the end of the session, even the most skeptical participants were contributing to the conversation. The subsequent workshops built on this foundation, focusing on giving and receiving feedback, addressing conflict directly, and creating channels for open communication. Throughout the process, I was struck by how eager most employees were for change. They'd been suffering under the old culture too, often silently, afraid to speak up for fear of being labeled not a team player, the very criticism that had been leveled at me. During my final workshop, Bradley Winston made a surprise appearance. He sat quietly at the back of the room, listening as employees role-played healthy communication scenarios. At the end, he stood and addressed the group. I want to thank Olivia for her courage, not just in how she left Pinnacle, but in how she's chosen to return and help us become better. Her story could have been just an entertaining viral moment, but she's turned it into an opportunity for real change. That's the kind of leadership we need to cultivate here. It was a nice sentiment, though I noticed he carefully avoided taking direct responsibility for the culture that had driven me to quit in the first place. Baby steps, I supposed. As the consulting project wrapped up, I felt a strange sense of closure. Pinnacle would never be my workplace again, but I'd helped make it a better environment for Riley and all the others who remained. The toxic culture that had crushed my spirit for 4 years was slowly being dismantled, partly because I'd found a creative way to expose it. The epilogue to my book, written a year later, described this unexpected turn of events. The gifts that ended my career at Pinnacle ultimately led me back there, I wrote, not as an employee, but as an agent of change. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't burning bridges, but helping rebuild them, on your own terms. Speaking Without Words went into a second printing, then a third. It was optioned for a film adaptation, though that project stalled in development hell. The GIF of Ron Swanson throwing his computer in the dumpster became my unofficial logo, appearing on merchandise that my publisher created for the book tour. Coffee mugs, t-shirts, stickers. Riley joked that I should get it tattooed on my arm. A permanent reminder of the moment I'd taken back my power. My story wasn't unique. Millions of people work in toxic environments every day. But the way I'd chosen to exit had struck a chord. In the years following my resignation, GIF resignation became a recognized phenomenon, with dozens of copycat exits appearing on social media. Most weren't as successful as mine. Some resulted in legal action, others in burned bridges that couldn't be rebuilt. I always advised caution when people asked if they should try it themselves. The GIFs weren't the point. I'd explain in interviews, they were just the medium. The message was that I refused to be silenced or diminished any longer. Find your own way to say that. It doesn't have to involve Willy Wonka or Ron Swanson. 5 years after my viral resignation, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from Vanessa Powell. I almost deleted it unread, but curiosity won out. I doubt you want to hear from me. It began. But I've been doing a lot of reflection recently. Your book was an uncomfortable mirror, forcing me to confront behaviors I'd justified for years. I won't ask for forgiveness. What I did to you and others at Pinnacle was inexcusable. But I wanted you to know that your story changed my perspective. I'm working with a therapist to understand why I felt the need to diminish others to elevate myself. If you're ever open to a conversation, I'd appreciate the opportunity to apologize properly. I showed the message to Riley during our monthly dinner. Wow, they said, reading it twice. That's actually seems sincere. Are you going to respond? I took a sip of wine, considering. I don't know. Part of me thinks it's too little, too late. Another part wonders if it's real growth or just image management. Only one way to find out, Riley pointed out. After a week of deliberation, I agreed to meet Vanessa at a quiet cafe downtown. She was already there when I arrived, looking smaller somehow, less intimidating than in my memories. She stood when she saw me, her expression a mixture of nervousness and resolve. Thank you for coming, she said as we sat down. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I admitted. The conversation that followed was awkward at first, both of us carefully selecting our words. But as the hour progressed, it evolved into something unexpectedly genuine. Vanessa spoke about her own experiences with toxic management early in her career, how she'd internalized those patterns and perpetuated them. She talked about the shock of seeing herself portrayed in my book and recognizing behaviors she'd never acknowledged. The worst part was that I couldn't even deny it, she said. Every example you gave, taking credit for your work, setting impossible deadlines, dismissing your concerns. I remembered doing those things. I just hadn't seen them as problematic at the time. They were just how business worked in my mind. I nodded, remembering my own realizations while writing the book. It's easy to normalize toxic behavior when it's all around you. After I left Pinnacle, I couldn't find another corporate position. Vanessa continued. Your story had spread too far, so I started consulting independently, working with small businesses on their marketing strategies. Without the pressure of corporate politics, I found I actually enjoyed the work more. And without anyone to step on, I had to rely on my own abilities. And how's that going? I asked, genuinely curious. Humbling, rewarding, financially unstable, she laughed. But I sleep better. We parted with no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful hugs or promises of friendship. Just a mutual acknowledgement that we'd both grown from the experience, albeit in very different ways. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt the final piece of my Pinnacle chapter click into place. The anger that had fueled my resignation had long since faded, replaced by something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Vanessa had been both villain and victim in my story, just as I had been both passive employee and agent of change. That evening, I opened my laptop and began writing again. Not a sequel to Speaking Without Words, but something new. A book about reconciliation and growth. About the possibilities that emerge when we confront the systems that shape our behavior. I titled the draft Beyond the GIFs, Rebuilding After Workplace Trauma. My agent loved the concept. This is exactly what readers of your first book need, she said. They've seen the dramatic exit, now show them what healing looks like. The second book sold even better than the first, reaching readers who were less interested in workplace drama and more focused on personal and organizational transformation. Universities added it to their business school curricula, and corporate HR departments used it as a training tool. I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences on organizational psychology and workplace culture, standing on stages I never would have accessed as a marketing analyst at Pinnacle. 7 years after my GIF resignation, Riley finally left Pinnacle, joining me at Novasphere as our new research director. We celebrated with drinks at Sullivan's, returning to the booth where we'd plotted Operation GIF resignation. Ever regret it? Riley asked as we clinked glasses. The GIFs? The viral fame? All of it? I considered the question seriously. My impulsive resignation had altered the trajectory of my career in ways I never could have predicted. It had brought public attention, book deals, speaking engagements, but also criticism, scrutiny, and the strange experience of becoming a workplace culture icon based on a single day's actions. No, I said finally. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that workplaces like Pinnacle exist, but I don't regret finding a way to make my exit meaningful. Riley nodded. You know, that email from Winston is still legendary at Pinnacle. Congratulations to Vanessa Powell on securing the expanded Hartwell account. People quote it sarcastically whenever someone tries to take credit for someone else's work. It's become shorthand for, we see what you're doing. I laughed. So my legacy lives on. More than you know, there's a framed printout of the Ron Swanson GIF in the break room now, part of the communication museum they created after your workshops. The thought of my resignation GIF hanging in the Pinnacle break room was so absurd that I couldn't help but laugh until tears came to my eyes. From silent protest to corporate art, the perfect encapsulation of how systems absorb and neutralize dissent. They missed the point entirely, didn't they? I said when I could speak again. Riley shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe they're trying to remind themselves not to create an environment where employees feel that's their only option. Either way, you made a mark. 10 years after my resignation. Speaking Without Words was published in a special anniversary edition, including a new foreword and additional chapters on how workplace communication had evolved in the decades since. Social media had transformed how employees expressed dissatisfaction, with platforms like Glassdoor and LinkedIn giving voice to experiences that once would have remained private. The Great Resignation had shifted power dynamics between employers and employees, making companies more responsive to concerns about toxic culture. For the anniversary, I was invited back to Pinnacle, now under new ownership after a merger, to give a keynote address to their entire staff. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, some familiar but most new, I felt a strange mix of emotions. This company had both broken and made me, pushing me to a breaking point that became a turning point. 10 years ago, I sat where many of you are sitting now. I began. I was exhausted, undervalued, and voiceless. The GIFs I used to resign weren't just a quirky stunt. They were the only way I could express years of accumulated frustration when words had failed me. But the real story isn't about GIFs or viral fame or even workplace revenge. It's about what happens when we refuse to accept environments that diminish us. It's about the courage to walk away and the wisdom to transform that exit into something meaningful. As I continued speaking, I noticed Riley in the back of the room, giving me a subtle thumbs up. Next to them stood Cameron, who had taken time away from Novosphere to support me. In the middle rows, I spotted several former colleagues who had been there on the day of my resignation, now in leadership positions themselves. And in the front row, somewhat to my surprise, sat Bradley Winston, no longer CEO but still on the board of directors. The most powerful form of workplace advocacy isn't always a dramatic exit, I concluded. Sometimes it's the daily commitment to creating environments where such exits aren't necessary, where communication flows freely, contributions are recognized, and growth is supported, where gifts can be just for fun, not silent screams of protest. The applause that followed was generous, but what meant more were the conversations afterward. Employees sharing their own stories, managers asking for advice, executives admitting to communication failures. My GIF resignation had started as a personal act of rebellion, but it had sparked conversations that continued a decade later. That evening, Cameron, Riley, and I celebrated at an upscale restaurant near the Pinnacle offices, a far cry from Sullivan's dive bar atmosphere. To the woman who resigned with GIFs and changed corporate America, Cameron toasted, raising her glass. That might be overstating it a bit, I laughed. I don't think so, Riley countered. You gave people permission to value themselves enough to leave toxic situations. And you showed companies the cost of creating those situations. That's not small. I considered this as we enjoyed our meal, reflecting on the strange journey from overworked marketing analyst to workplace culture advocate. My spontaneous decision to communicate my resignation through GIFs had led to consequences I never could have predicted. Books, speaking engagements, consulting work, and most importantly, a platform to address issues that affected millions of workers. The waitress brought our check in a small folder. When I opened it, I found not just the bill, but a note scrawled on a napkin. Your GIF resignation got me through my toxic job until I could find something better. Thank you. It wasn't signed. I showed it to Riley and Cameron, touched by this unexpected connection. See, Riley said, changed lives. 15 years after my resignation, I published my third book, Visual Voices: How Images Transform Workplace Communication. It explored how visual communication, from GIFs to emojis to memes, had evolved from novelty to necessity in professional settings, particularly for expressing emotions and experiences that traditional corporate language failed to capture. By then, my GIF resignation was studied in communication courses and business schools, less as a cautionary tale of workplace rebellion and more as a turning point in how employees expressed dissatisfaction. The viral nature of my exit had helped expose toxic workplace cultures to public scrutiny in ways that formal complaints and HR processes often couldn't. At 50, I found myself in an unexpected role, elder stateswoman of workplace communication. regularly consulting with Fortune 500 companies on creating environments where employees felt heard and valued. My office walls displayed framed copies of my book covers, speaking engagement posters, and in the center, a small printout of that first resignation GIF. Ron Swanson throwing his computer in the dumpster. A reminder of where it all began. Riley, now Chief Research Officer at one of the largest marketing firms in the country, still met me monthly for dinner. We'd remained close through career changes, relationships, life milestones. On the 15th anniversary of my resignation, they presented me with a custom-made snow globe containing a tiny dumpster with a miniature computer next to it. "Shake it," they instructed. When I did, instead of snow, tiny glitter GIFs swirled around the scene. "This is simultaneously the most thoughtful and most ridiculous gift I've ever received," I said, laughing. "Just like your resignation was simultaneously the most unprofessional and most effective career move ever," Riley replied with a grin. Looking back over the years since that fateful day, I could trace how one impulsive decision had altered not just my career path, but my entire perspective on work, communication, and personal agency. The angry, exhausted marketing analyst who'd sat in that park scrolling through GIFs had no idea she was about to start a conversation that would continue for decades. My GIF resignation hadn't just been an exit strategy, it had been an entrance into a different kind of professional life, one where I could help others find their voices, whether through words, images, or some combination of both. The revenge I'd sought against Vanessa and Pinnacle had transformed into something far more powerful: systemic change. As I placed Riley's snow globe on my office shelf, I thought about all the emails I'd received over the years from people who'd found courage in my story. Courage to leave toxic jobs, to advocate for better treatment, to value themselves enough to walk away when necessary. Some had used GIFs, most hadn't, but all had found ways to reclaim their voices in workplaces designed to silence them. That, ultimately, was the legacy of my resignation, not the viral moment or the books or speaking engagements, but the ripple effect of empowerment. One small act of rebellion that gave others permission to value themselves enough to demand better. In the years that followed, as workplace communication continued to evolve with new technologies and changing expectations, I remained an advocate for authentic expression in professional settings. My fourth book, published 20 years after my resignation, explored how artificial intelligence was transforming workplace dynamics, creating both new possibilities for connection and new challenges for human expression. By then, my GIF resignation was considered a quaint early example of visual communication in professional contexts. What had seemed radical in 2025 was now seen as a precursor to the multimodal communication that had become standard in most workplaces. Young professionals could hardly imagine a time when expressing emotions through images was considered unprofessional. At 60, I stepped back from active consulting to focus on writing and occasional speaking engagements. My home office wall displayed a digital frame cycling through significant moments from my career: book launches, keynote addresses, awards ceremonies. But it always returned to that first GIF, the catalyst for everything that followed. 25 years after my resignation, I received an invitation that brought my journey full circle. Pinnacle Dynamics, now a different company in almost every way except name, was establishing a scholarship for students focused on workplace communication ethics. They wanted to name it after me, the Olivia Wright Scholarship for Ethical Communication. Riley, now semi-retired but still my closest friend and advisor, read the invitation with raised eyebrows. "Well, that's ironic. The company that drove you to quit in the most dramatic way possible now wants to put your name on a scholarship about ethical communication." "It is ironic," I agreed, "but maybe also appropriate. My experience there did launch my work in this field, just not in the way anyone expected." I accepted the invitation to the scholarship launch ceremony, curious to see what remained of the company I'd left so dramatically all those years ago. The Pinnacle headquarters had moved to a different building, with none of the claustrophobic fluorescent lighting I remembered. The corporate culture had transformed under multiple leadership changes, influenced in part by the public scrutiny that had followed my viral exit. As I stood at the podium, looking out at faces much younger than mine, I felt a sense of completion. 25 years ago, I left this company using only GIFs because I couldn't find words to express years of accumulated frustration. I told them, "Today, I'm honored that my name will be associated with helping future communicators find ethical and effective ways to be heard, whether through words, images, or whatever media emerge in the years to come." The first recipient of the scholarship was a doctoral student researching how visual communication could help neurodiverse employees express themselves in workplace settings. As I handed her the award, I saw in her eyes the same passion for communication that had driven my own career, albeit from a very different starting point. "Your resignation story was in my parents' business ethics textbook," she told me during the reception afterward. "It's surreal meeting you in person." I laughed at this reminder of my age and the passage of time. "And now you'll take this work in directions I never imagined. That's how progress happens." Later that evening, alone in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and found myself searching for that original Ron Swanson GIF. It played on my screen just as it had 25 years earlier, the character methodically removing his computer, carrying it to a dumpster, and tossing it in with calm determination. What had resonated about that image? Why had it felt like the perfect expression of my feelings at that moment? Perhaps it was the deliberateness of the action, not a frantic rage quit, but a considered rejection of a broken system. Or maybe it was the simplicity of the message, "I'm done with this." Either way, that single GIF had launched a conversation about workplace communication that continued a quarter-century later. I closed my laptop and looked out at the city lights, reflecting on how one impulsive decision had shaped my entire professional life. The revenge I'd sought against Vanessa and Pinnacle had been satisfied long ago, transformed into something far more meaningful. A career dedicated to helping others find their voices in environments designed to silence them. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemies, but building something they could never imagine from the ashes of what they broke. My GIF resignation hadn't just been an ending, it had been a beginning, opening doors to a life and career I never could have anticipated as that frustrated marketing analyst scrolling through reaction images in a park. The next morning, before leaving the hotel, I received an email notification about a social media mention. A young employee had posted about the scholarship ceremony, including a picture of me at the podium. The caption read, "Met my communication hero today. The original Oshchi GIF resignation legend. Still inspiring us to speak truth to power, just with more sophisticated tools than Willy Wonka GIFs." I smiled at the description. The tools might have changed, but the fundamental challenge remained: how to be authentically heard in environments that often discouraged real communication. My viral moment had been a product of its time, but the underlying message continued to resonate across generations. As I packed my suitcase, I noticed the hotel had provided a complimentary pad of notepaper with the Pinnacle logo, a small detail I might have missed if not for my history with the company. On impulse, I took one sheet and wrote a brief note. 25 years ago, I left this company using only GIFs. Today, I'm using words to express my hope that the scholarship in my name will help create workplaces where everyone can communicate authentically. Sometimes the best revenge is seeing your worst experience transformed into something positive for others. Olivia Wright. I left the note on the desk, knowing it would likely be discarded by housekeeping or perhaps kept as a curiosity by some hotel employee. It didn't matter. The act of writing it, of using words where once I had needed GIFs, felt like the closing of a circle. As I left the hotel and headed to the airport, I received a text from Riley. "So, how was it, returning to the scene of the crime?" I smiled and replied not with words, but with a GIF. Daenerys Targaryen walking away from flames, unburned and stronger than before. Some stories end where they began, but transformed by the journey between. My GIF resignation had started as an act of desperation and become a catalyst for change, not just in my life, but in how we think about workplace communication. The revenge I'd sought had evolved into something far more powerful, a legacy of empowerment that would continue long after that viral moment was forgotten. And that, I reflected as my plane took off, was a dish best served not cold, but forward, to future generations who would find their own innovative ways to make their voices heard when traditional channels failed them. Just as I had, with nothing but a folder full of GIFs and the courage to use them.